Ahead of our April auction here at Manor Park Classics, and actually for the second auction in a row, we have a Mini 1275 GT. The 70s replacement for the iconic Mini Cooper that in many ways preceded a lot of the hot hatches that we saw in the late 70s and early 80s. But the GT remains relatively controversial within the Mini world, and so in this little video for you today, not only do I want to talk about this car in particular, about its brilliant bronze paintwork, its little de novo wheels and stripy seats being a later GT. Also, this one has a few choice modifications, making it really quite nippy. As I said, we will get to those later, but I want to talk as well about the history of the GT, about why it exists in the form it does, about what led to the decisions that created the square-fronted Minis that otherwise were very much still a Mini, and also why these cars didn't quite meet the expectations that British Leyland had for them. So I want us to step back in time 10 years from the launch of these cars to 1959, when the Mini was first launched, and of course it was novel, it was radical, it was a little bit weird, and it took a couple of years for the British consumers to really latch onto them. But the Mini was never Britain's best-selling car, which is strange to say considering that when you add all Mini production up, it is the most popular car ever built in Britain. You know, in individual years, it was never the top seller. Instead, that was the mantle that was taken on by its bigger brother, the Austin Morris 1100. And therefore the Mini was, of course, a very popular car, but at the end of the day, it was just a car. Initially, they were named Austin 7s and Morris Mini Minors, harking back to its own illustrious predecessors. And so, as with any other car, BMC, Austin Morris, whatever they wanted to call themselves that week, looked to replacing it. The Mini's creator, Sir Alec Izagonis, was still BMC's chief engineer, and so he created a prototype known as 9X, a car which took all of the Mini's inherent character and just refined it that bit more. Like the Mini, it was very simple, it was very austere, but it was also absolute engineering genius. Again, it had a transverse engine front-wheel drive, but the engine was all new, with an overhead camshaft. It also had totally different suspension. It still had the silly sliding windows, etc., because Izagonis was a bit mad. But overall, it was more practical than a Mini, in spite of the fact that it was a few inches shorter. It also even had a hatchback at the rear end, but as per the nature of BMC, later of course British Leyland, this car did not go into production. The reason being is that 9X was going to be ruinously expensive to productionize and then actually build, and their current range of front drive cars were possibly loss-making. The Mini was such a work of engineering genius that for the price they had to sell it at, same with the 1100 and then the larger 1800, they didn't make any money on them. They made little to no profit, if not a loss, on every single car they built. So the fact that they produced so many Minis and so many 1100s, in fact, made the situation worse. So in 1967, they launched a quick facelift of the Mini, just to keep it ticking over really, known as the Mark II. Much like the Mark I, it still had its external door hinges, those aforementioned sliding windows. Instead, it just had a new grille, a larger rear window, and new rear lamps. Very, very affordable, very simple facelift, 8 years into the car's production. And the reason they could get away with that is because the Super Mini market, as we know it today, still didn't exist. The Super Mini is named after this car, and in 1967, it still didn't exist. We were 5 years away from the likes of the Fiat 127 and the Renault 5, so with no one really challenging the Mini, Austin Morris could still do as they pleased with it really. Just keep making it more affordable to build, keep making it more economical, and hopefully see profits increase that little bit. However, the press weren't so friendly to the Mark II Mini. Because it still retained those sliding windows, external door hinges, they felt that BMC were taking the consumer for a bit of a ride. By this point, those features were seen as being absolutely ancient, and so BMC were panned for not going far enough with the Mark II Mini. Of course, the press weren't to know that in the background they were experimenting with 9X, but in 1969, with 9X essentially cancelled, BMC, or now British Leyland as they were, debuted both the Mark III Mini and the Mini Clubman. In the intervening years, they'd learnt a lot of lessons about how to create cars that people actually wanted. They realised that people were not buying these cars because of their transverse engine, because of their fluid suspension, etc. They were buying them because they were cheap, they were quite characterful, and because they were also very cheap to maintain. And also in the Mini's case and the 1100's case, they looked good as well. But with BMC's larger cars like the 1800, the 3-litre, and eventually the Austin Maxi as well, they did not sell so well because they didn't make people feel very good about themselves. In the 1960s, the masters of this were undoubtedly Ford, who were producing cars like the Anglia, later replaced, of course, by the Escort, and of course, the Mark I and Mark II Cortinas. Those were cars that people really wanted because although they were very simple mechanically, they looked brilliant. They made you feel good about yourself. They were cheap to maintain, to service, etc. And they had pedigree. When Ford won on a Sunday, they sold on a Monday. And while the Mini was very successful in touring cars and in, of course, the Monte Carlo Rally, across the range of cars, BMC, British Leyland, whatever, they knew that they needed to headhunt some people from Ford to bring a bit of common sense into their design. So in 1967, Roy Haynes came over from Ford, fresh off finishing the Mark II Cortina that interrupted the 1100's reign as Britain's best-selling car just for 1 year in 1967. He'd also been working at the time of his departure on the Mark I Capri. So this is a chap that knew how to design and build simple yet desirable cars, and that is what he wanted to bring to BMC. The initial concepts for what became the Mini Clubman did not include only a whole new, much more contemporary, very 1970s front end, but also, stolen from the 9X, a hatchback. And in 1968-69, a hatchback was an incredibly rare feature. The Renault 4 and Renault 16 come to mind, and of course, the Austin Maxi did it as well. But in this era, that was going to be quite novel again. They saw how this could potentially bring new customers to the Mini, improve what they already had, but again, they were losing money. They had to do all this work on an absolute shoestring and make the resulting car as affordable to build as possible. So the Mini was to remain a saloon. Instead, all the attention would be focused on improving what they had and adding this new squared off front end. And I must say, from the outset, it's a very smart, very sophisticated looking small car in a way the original Mini wasn't. Now sure, that car is very cutesy and I prefer the original Mini front end, but in the context of 1969, 1970, this must have looked so much sharper. Very similar though it is to the Mark II Cortina, the Austin Maxi, and eventually the Morris Marina as well. You could make the argument that Roy Haynes was a bit of a one-trick pony, but nonetheless, the Mini was thoroughly modernised. But the reason that they put so much attention on this new front end, rather than the improvement practicality-wise by adding a hatchback, is because this made the car much easier to service and maintain. So they spent less time in the dealers, all by an addition of a couple of inches at the front. That made all the ignition systems at the front of the A-Series engine that bit easier to access. And so a Mini Clubman, though it was slightly less aerodynamic than the original Mini, was easier and cheaper to live with. But that idea of affordability and serviceability, not just in terms of production, but also in after sales, brings us to a member of the Mini range that we haven't really yet mentioned, only in passing, the Mini Cooper. The car that was responsible for the Mini's real, big influx of pedigree in the 1960s was again ruinously expensive to produce. In terms of appearance, they didn't look all that different to a normal Mini, just really the contrast roof separating it to most people, but under the skin, its custom-built engine with its different engine block, mad cylinder head and twin carburetors was both, as I said again, expensive and unreliable. It was not unusual for Mini Coopers to end up back at the dealers under warranty 2, even 3 times. They were just not the most robust of cars. And so in creating the Mark III Mini and creating the Mini Clubman with this new, much more sophisticated front end, they also wanted to replace the Mini Cooper, and that is where this 1275 GT comes in. So for its relative capacities, the original Mini Cooper was very well engineered. From only a 998cc engine, it made 55 brake horsepower, and the Cooper S from its 1275 engine made 76 brake horsepower. This car was not really looking to replace the full-fat Mini Cooper S, instead looking to replace the standard 55 horsepower Mini Cooper. We'll get a little bit more into that engineering stuff soon when we talk about this particular car, and of course when we go for a drive. But first of all, the GT was the first Mini to gain any kind of exuberant and extroverted styling. As I said, the Mini Cooper looked very similar to a normal Mini, and again from Ford and Vauxhall and the like, British Leyland were learning that to produce a car that people wanted to buy, you had to make it look cool. And so the 1275 GT had originally little road-style wheels, replaced in 1974 by these 12-inch de novo style wheels. Then of course we have the stripes down the bottom at the side, proclaiming proudly that it is a Mini 1275 GT. At the back we have a red badge, and at the front on early cars, which has been retrofitted to this later one, we have a little GT badge on the grille. So think of this car therefore as a tart-up of an existing Mini, designed to replace the Mini Cooper, not necessarily in terms of its performance, but in terms of its sales. They wanted people to come and buy Minis. They wanted to produce a new, sports halo for the Mini that was not only cheaper to build, but also cheaper under warranty as well. They wanted this car to be much more sensible than the old Mini Cooper. In a sense, a proper Mini GT, a grand tourer that instead of being all racy about going on the track, about going on rally stages, was instead about refinement as well as performance in such a small car. So we'll come back to that in a little while when we go for a drive, but now I want to talk to you a little bit about the mechanical components of this particular car. In this metallic gold as well, I must say, forgetting this is a GT, so it has the thing in the centre, feel a little bit like Raymond Baxter. If you remember a little bit of corporate BL propaganda from 1978, the best Mini yet, this feels very much of this era, especially from this angle in this sunshine. Mini nerds will know what I mean. But under here we'll notice that this is not a normal GT's power plant, because in the chase for reducing costs, etc., they use the large capacity 1275cc engine with a single carburettor. This car, however, has twin carburettors. From starting it before, I could tell it also has an electric fuel pump. There's a big fuel pressure regulator over there. There is also a much better radiator and a new cylinder head. Now, I can't tell you the exact specs of this car. I can tell all this stuff's been done to it as well. Also, the original cylinder head is in the passenger footwell, but head over to our website and you'll see all the specs of this car, exactly what makes it tick. But yeah, there's some serious stuff going on there that we must go and enjoy. Inside this car as well, we have these lovely stripy seats which are fitted to the GT from, I think, 1976 or so, and of course 3 instruments with a rev counter. The first Mini, even the Mini Coopers, didn't come with rev counters. This was the first Mini to come fitted as standard with one of those. And what I'm getting from this car is actually, it's in really incredible condition. This upholstery, goes very, very flaky very, very quickly. It goes loose, and this, it's all in lovely, lovely condition. The brown carpets as well, little 2-spoke steering wheel, which for full disclosure, I think might be from a slightly later Mini, without a badge in the middle of it, but it's in lovely condition, this car, and the paintwork absolutely glistens. It's, yeah, a very, very cool thing, but of course, we're gonna have to go for a drive. And so, in our very revised Mini, in our car that a lot of people say is a poor relation to the old Mini Cooper, This particular one isn't. However, we will start with the standard 1275 GT because the original 998 Mini Cooper produced 55 brake horsepower from its 998cc engine. This car, with its much larger displacement, produces 59 or so brake horsepower. So we are a little bit up on power here, but having the extra displacement means we can get a heck of a lot more torque. So in the old Mini Cooper, we had something like 57 pounds-feet of torque. Now I can't quite remember how many we have in the GT. 69 pounds-feet rings a bell. Happy to be corrected on that though, this is just off the top of my head. But that is a serious bump up percentage-wise, and it means that they could gear this car much higher than the old Mini Cooper. Again, Mini GT, Mini Grand Tourer. And so, while an old Mini Cooper would be screaming at 4,700 RPM at 70 miles per hour, this car would end up at just over 4,000, or at least the standard GT would. I don't know about the gearing in this particular car, but that means that this car is so much more refined than a standard Mini Cooper. And so for the average consumer, there is absolutely no reason why you would have preferred a Mini Cooper to one of these. This is faster, more tractable, because the power and torque are made lower down in the GT. And of course more comfortable, quieter on the motorway, etc. This particular car, however, is a bit of a beast. Now, already I can hear that this car has some straight cut gears, which makes me very, very happy indeed. But what I'm also very, very pleased to say is that there's a heck of a lot of induction noise. So from those twin carburetors, you get this. It snarls away at you. It's fantastic. A-Series engines, the A-Series I reckon is one of the... There you go. It's the Hey Series engine nowadays. That always happens. My phone always goes off whenever I say A-Series engine. But the A-Series engine is one of the best little four-cylinder engines ever built. There's no doubt about that. And when you really let it breathe with a cylinder head, with twin carburetors, it just turns into a monster. They're so grunty because they produce all that torque so low down that it's just so easy. No indicating. But yeah, let's boot it again. What an absolutely hilarious little car. I love it to bits. That intake noise, that snort is brilliant. But this car also feels a little bit stiffer than a normal GT. Now I can't say for sure, again, exactly what's been done. It's all on our website if you are interested. Or at least it will be by the time this video is uploaded. As of me recording it, not yet. You feel the front end just grappling on that power. It's quite a quick car, this. It's quite a quick car. But early 1275 GTs had hydroelastic suspension. So I don't know, I can't remember whether I mentioned it at the very start of the video or not. But in the 60s, the Mini switched using Dr. Alex Moulton's hydroelastic system, which is brilliant, produces fantastic ride handling compromise. But from 1971, the Clubman and the GT switched back to the older compromised rubber cones. And while a lot of people don't like hydroelastic because usually they don't understand it, it does make a much more comfortable, better controlled car than the cones. So as well as producing a Mini Cooper replacement that wasn't as fast as a Cooper S, and creating this new tarted up Mini that was meant to be cheaper to produce, they went back to the cones again because they were cheaper to produce. They kept doing the hydroelastic in only the Clubman and GT. for an extra 2 years until 71, as I said, whereas the old 850 and 1000 went back to cones immediately in 1969. But another thing that changed in the 1275's production run is the gear change. So especially for the Mini Cooper, well actually especially for the 1100, the Mini Cooper just got it earlier because it was available earlier, they engineered the remote gear change, which is essentially a big engine steady from the back of the gearbox all the way down to where the selector is, which makes it all very, very rigid and gives you this seemingly very vague gear change, but suddenly when you find the gear it just clicks. It's so snickety, a remote change. But in 1973, this is ace, man. I love rev matching is so easy in a Mini. From 1973 they switched to the rod change, which is what this car has, with a much simpler, again, easier, cheaper to produce system. But in this case, it's not necessarily such a bad thing. A Mini, although I've talked about this being a GT in ways, being a little bit easier to use on motorways, Minis are never overly comfortable cars. You instead get it for the brilliant steering response, where with this leather trimmed 2-spoke, very thin rim steering wheel still, you can just absolutely dance it. They are so eager, so front-endy Minis. I just love this little thing. It is ace. Yeah, it's a Mini. You can't not love it. So if you would like to get your hand on this little thing, then do head over to our website, have a look at the photographs, read the description and figure out all the specs of this thing, etc. And then maybe even come and book an appointment and see it for yourself ahead of our auction in early April. So I do hope you enjoyed this little video, this little retrospective on the GT. If you did, please do click like and subscribe to our channel as well. It's grown an incredible amount in the past year or so. So do please give us a hand if you'd like to see more videos like this on some of the amazing cars that we're very, very fortunate to have in.